Hello everybody, it's Lewis here, and I'm going to be doing a little bit of, when I say a little bit, I mean quite a lot, of a video just going over the physiological processes involved in digestion. Okay, so digestion will start technically it starts before you put any food in your mouth, because even the sight, smell, or thought of food can start to do a few hormonal things. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to track a bolus of food from mouth to bum. So we'll start with the processes involved in the mouth. So broadly, we're talking about digestion. So in the mouth, we've got a couple of things that happen. We've got ingestion, followed by chewing, which is mastication. And then we've got deglutition. So ingestion, food goes in. Then we've got mastication, and this is broken down into a couple of things. We've got the first part, so part one of mechanical digestion. And we've also got part one of chemical digestion. So with the mechanical digestion, we've got teeth and the tongue, and that breaks down food, increases the surface area so that chemical digestion can take place. And this is the thing that we find in the mouth is, of course, salivary amylase. Salivary amylase's job, as I'm sure you well know, breaks down starch into sugar. That's why if you put bread in your mouth and you chew it for any length of time, it'll start to go sweet. Then, of course, we've got deglutition, which is swallowing, and this is broken down into two parts. Part one is the buccal phase, and that is a voluntary phase. And part two is the pharyngeal, esophageal. Phase, and that is very much involuntary. So part one is voluntary, part two is involuntary. After that, we go into moving the food further into our esophagus, which is then under the control of peristalsis. For completion purposes, let's do that. Okay, so what happens with deglutition? Well, basically, I say basically, there's nothing basic about any of this. It's bloody physiology, for goodness sake. We've got the coordination of your, where shall I put this? So let's get rid of peristalsis. Let's get rid of that. And let's just make a note of what we've got. So we've got coordinated activity of the tongue, the soft palate, the pharynx, the esophagus, and 22 separate different muscle groups to carry out the two main phases. There is nervous interaction in the second part, which is coordinated all by the medulla and the lower pons. And the idea is that in the pharyngeal esophageal phase of it, so in other words in this bit here, everything other than routes into the digestive tract get closed off. Now we know this isn't always true because almost everybody has had some food go down the wrong way, and they either choke on it a little bit or they laugh and stuff comes out of their nose. However, we're going to talk about this as if it's a best case scenario. So, in the buccal phase, you've chewed up food, you've mixed it with saliva, and then what you do is you take a bolus of food and you force it with the tongue into the pharynx. Okay, so let's see if I can get this picture to do what I want it to do. So in the buccal phase, we're looking at part A. So we're looking at this bit. So you've, as I said, you've chewed your food, you've mixed it well with saliva, and then you use the tongue to force your bolus of food into the pharynx, which is this bit here. And at that point, it passes out of your control and it is totally then in control by reflexes. So the idea then is that the pharyngeal esophageal phase, in other words, part one of the involuntary phase of this, takes the food and puts it from the pharynx down into the esophagus. This is all controlled by the vagus nerve. And this phase is what, also what I'm looking for, promotes the mobility of your digestive organs from this point on. So what is happening in order to try and close off all of the other routes, because what we don't want is anything to go past the uvula up into your nose, and we don't want anything to come past the epiglottis and go down into your trachea. So what happens is your larynx, as you are swallowing, pulls up. That, mixed with the force of the bolus of food, takes the epiglottis, which is all that bit there, and turns it so that it forces it down, meaning that the bolus can't then go into the trachea. At the same time, your tongue and your soft palate are forcing everything upwards, which extends the uvula out, and the idea is that that closes off the routes towards your nose. As I've said, that's in an ideal world. It doesn't always necessarily happen that way. So, tongue blocks off the mouth and soft palate, larynx rises, and the idea is the openings into anything that could be respiratory is closed off. That way, food moves through your pharynx into the esophagus, and then peristalsis takes over. So that's that bit. So, peristalsis is doing its job. And basically how peristalsis is working, hang on, let's see if I can get this to work. Let's put that there. So remember we said you get 22 separate different types of muscle groups. So you've got your bolus of food that's come down from the pharyngeal esophageal phase of deglutition, and what we get is we get a contraction of the smooth muscle around it, a relaxation of the smooth muscle below it, which forces the bolus of food gradually downwards. And it's almost like, imagine you being one of these people who like to make meatballs but can't be bothered to make up a mix of meat. And what happens in that situation is that you squeeze a sausage through its skin. So you, in other words, you just squeeze the bolus of food, and as it moves down, you squeeze it again, and you move the bolus further down and further down by squeezing at the top of it. So that's your peristalsis taken care of. At the end of peristalsis, can I delete you? Yes, good. Let's move everything back out a little bit. at the end of peristalsis, the bolus of food will come into contact with the first of our sphincters. Here we go. Let's just put you here. Not that I got anything against the vagus nerve, just trying to save a bit of space. And now is this one, the cardioesophageal sphincter. So this is all. Hang on a second. This is this bit here. It's the distal esophagus. And at the end of that, the bolus of food reaches the cardioesophageal sphincter, and what that does is it causes the cardioesophageal sphincter to open, and for the bolus of food to enter the first part of the stomach, being the cardia. And then once then, it's actually, that bolus of food is into the stomach. The movement of food through the pharynx and the esophagus is completely automatic, okay? Totally automatic. So much so, if you were so inclined, you could stand yourself on your head, you could swallow, peristalsis would happen, gravity aids nothing at all in this process. It would still go the same way. The only thing that's going to cause it to go the other way is vomiting. Okay, so what does the stomach do? A couple of things that it does as follows. 1, it holds your digested food. 2, degrades that food. Don't forget, the gastrointestinal tract is not so much an assembly line, it's more of a disassembly line. So, holds, degrades, it then passes it on, so it turns it into chyme. So it goes from being a bolus into being chyme, and then it delivers that chyme, to the small intestine. I'm just going to put SI because I'm too lazy. What else does it do? Chemical digestion. It digests proteins. Protein digestion. Does that with a particular enzyme, and that is pepsin. We've got a little bit of phys to do on how we take pepsinogen, which is the inactive version of pepsin, and turn it into its active. And also we've got vitamin B12 absorption. So we can do a few things. Quite clever. We like the stomach. Okay. So what happens? Like I said, we've got some neurohormonal stuff going on. So things that can affect the stomach is sight of food, smell of food, and and of course actually putting food into the stomach, it'll change the pH, and as the stomach starts to become acidic, we start to release gastric juice. Release gastric juice. So what are we talking about? So we got food entering into the stomach. What does this do? It increases the pH. That will also stimulate the release of gastrin from G cells. And then where are those G cells? They're in the stomach mucosa, just to be completely above board with everything. Now we've got our first little bit of real physiology to do. So let's just take a little bit of the wall of this stomach. And let's zoom it out. So what we're going to look at is what happens in a parietal cell. So let's draw our parietal cell in here, like this. And this side is the basolateral side, and then this membrane is the apical membrane, which basically means that this area here is the lumen of the stomach, and then all of this area surrounding it is the interstitial fluid. Is the interstitium. There. Let's just get rid of this lumen, because I don't need to insult anybody's intelligence by trying to keep that there. I can just say that that's the apical cell membrane, and you should know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, we've got a little bit of work to do. Okie dokie. So what have we got in the apical cell membrane? We have got a leakage channel for potassium, and we have got a proton pump that requires ATP, and we've also got a leakage channel for chloride ions. Over on the basolateral side, we've got a sodium-potassium pump, and we've got a bicarbonate and chloride antiporter that doesn't require ATP to work. So, in the interstitium, we've got CO2. The CO2 is going to find its way into a parietal cell, because that's what it does. It dissolves like crazy. There, it comes into contact with water, and CO2 and water enter into a reversible equation where they will form carbonic acid, H2CO3. And then carbonic acid, because it is a volatile acid, and we've got carbonic anhydrase in the system, will then fall apart, and it'll fall apart into a proton and a bicarbonate ion. Well, this is interesting, because we have got, as we said earlier, a bicarbonate antiporter brings chloride ions the other way. And look at this. Oh, we've got a chloride leakage channel. There. Now, what else have we got? I said we got a proton pump on this side. And that proton pump will take that proton away, and it will bring a potassium in the opposite direction. But we've also got a potassium leakage channel, which takes the potassium out to allow the cycle to continue. And over on the basolateral cell membrane, we've also got a sodium potassium pump. Over there as well. So we can pump potassium in from the basolateral membrane across the apical membrane, and we can recycle potassium that is coming in from the apical membrane back out, so that we can continue that proton pump. Look at what we've done. We've taken CO2 from the interstitium. We've buffered it to carbonic acid. We've used carbonic anhydrase to break it down into proton and bicarbonate. We've then taken that proton and pumped it across the apical cell membrane back into the lumen of the stomach. And look at this, we've also got chloride. Well, what do you think happens when a proton and chloride comes together? We make hydrochloric acid, which is the chief thing going on in the stomach. So let's zoom that back out. That is the mechanism by which, because don't forget, I did say that this was all gastrin mediated, and gastrin is going to fire up this guy, this proton pump, this proton ATPase is supercharged by gastrin. Just for completion, put the ATP back in there. So what else does gastrin do? Gastrin's got a couple of jobs. So as we said, where shall I put this? Just move all this way. So, gastrin. First things first, it's released by the stomach mucosa, and then what does it do? Point one, in the mechanisms that we just discussed, it stimulates the release of hydrochloric acid from the parietal cells. What does that do? That causes the conversion of pepsinogen to pepsin. And it's pepsin that starts the process of protein digestion. Now, there's an interesting thing that goes on here. You get a little thing where you get a little feedback loop. So what you get is hydrochloric acid. Gastrin causes the release of hydrochloric acid. So gastrin causes the release of hydrochloric acid, which causes protein breakdown, protein digestion. But partially digested proteins cause an increase in the release of gastrin, which then causes the release of more hydrochloric acid, which breaks down more proteins, which is a lovely little positive feedback loop. So in other words, if you eat a really protein-rich meal, it's going to get digested, and it's going to get digested fairly quickly. Now I know always there are some of you in the class that like to lift up heavy things and put them back down again and keep on doing so until such time as when the sun is out, your guns can come out. And in order to facilitate the increase and expansion of said guns, you like to eat or consume, at the very least through maybe some like whey protein or stuff like that, lots of protein. I'm here to tell you that it's probably not doing an awful lot, and the best way that you can get your protein is to just eat smaller meals of a higher protein content throughout the day. Sorry about that. So increased hydrochloric acid, what does that do? Everything that we just talked about. Point two, it will also, through a couple of different things, and this is stretch reflex as well, but also aided by the fact that gastrin is just around, it will take the pyloric region of the stomach, the pylorus, and it will cause it to increase the pumping of chyme, getting my terms interchangeable there, the pumping of chyme into the duodenum. So it increases or stimulates pyloric pumping. 3. It will stimulate a couple of different reflexes, and this is the idea of just moving everything further along in the stomach again, so further down. What it's going to stimulate is the gastroileal, can't actually write today. Gastroileal and gastrocolic reflexes, and that's responsible for moving food further along into our disassembly line. It will also cause the release of cholecystokinin by the duodenum. And we'll have a little look at what CCK does when we actually get into the duodenum. Oh, look at this, it's doing other things in the other parts of the gastrointestinal tract too. What else is it going to do? It stimulates the release of bile. It stimulates the release of pancreatic juice. Where are they coming from? Gallbladder and pancreas. So, gastrin's clever. The stomach is clever. The other thing that the stomach is going to do, of course, it is going to pound away at anything that you've eaten. Your stomach will do some mechanical digestion. It will churn. It will pound. And along with gastrin affecting the pyloric pumping, the very fact that your stomach is stretched because it's got stretch receptors all the way through it will also cause it to start pummeling your food. So your stomach will churn. It will add chemicals, and then it will move food through your pyloric sphincter into the rest of your gastrointestinal tract. And actually, as a matter of fact, I think I'm going to leave that video here, and then I'm going to pick it up. Yeah, I will. I'll pick up the duodenum part of it then with another video. So that was everything from, let's just go back up, ingestion through to the activities of the stomach from a physiological perspective. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to move on to food entering the duodenum.